Good morning, everybody. It's so lovely to be with you this morning. My name is Alison Yoshimoto-Towery, the Executive Director for the UC-CSU Collaborative, and we're in for a treat, truly. I want to thank you for your flexibility in transitioning to a webinar format this morning. The great news is 5 years ago, I don't know if we would have been able to do that, and now we're able to so easily. So thank you for your understanding. With no further ado, I just wanted to give 3 overview slides about the UC-CSU Collaborative. Given that we were state funded in 2019 and 2022, it's relatively new. So on the next slide, I'll just share that we believe in the UC-CSU Collaborative, that all students have value and promise, and that differences in students and how they learn is really the norm rather than the exception. And that everyone who interacts with students, including teachers, administrators, families, and caregivers, and school staff, plays a really important role in ensuring our students' growth. So our goal is to grow the knowledge and skills, if we look at the next slide, of all those who positively impact the experience of diverse learners in school, from pre-service, in-service educators, and again, to all of the groups that I mentioned, including policymakers, to ensure that everyone has access to trusted information to inform decision-making and practice. So today, we're really pleased to have Dr. Barry Prizant with us. Following Dr. Prizant, one of our distinguished professors here at the University of California, Los Angeles, Dr. Connie Kasari. She's a distinguished professor of human development and psychology in the School of Education, and she has a joint appointment in the Department of Psychiatry. And she is a founding member of the Center for Autism Research and Treatment at UCLA. And so we're really pleased to have her facilitate the conversation, and she'll come up directly after Dr. Prizant speaks. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Daniel Franklin to introduce our keynote speaker today. Daniel, thank you and welcome.
Oh, hi, Alison. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. I welcome everybody in attendance. I'm especially grateful to UCLA and Cal State, the team members who helped facilitate today's event. Thanks so much. And a special big thanks to Chip and Carrie Robertson, who did so much to make today possible. So thank you, Chip and Carrie. And I have a very special gratitude to extend to Dr. Connie Kasari. It was on a warm June day in 1996 that Dr. Kasari awarded me a PhD from her program right here at UCLA. Dr. Kasari, thank you so much for launching my career in this amazing area of education. I am forever grateful to you, so thank you. Dr. Barry Prizant is a world-renowned expert on autism. His forward-thinking ideas about neurodiversity in the classroom take into account the chronic and impactful effects of trauma related to being neurodiverse. Dr. Prizant has over 50 years experience as a clinical scholar, consultant, researcher, and program consultant for individuals with autism. He has published numerous articles, book chapters on autism, childhood communication disorders, and child development. He has given hundreds of seminars and workshops in all 50 states and in over 25 countries around the world. Dr. Prizant's best-selling book, Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism, is now published in 26 languages and was selected as the featured book on autism by the United Nations in 2017. Dr. Prizant, it's an honor to introduce you today. Welcome, Dr. Prizant.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. And thanks to everybody for our slight change of plans. I appreciate the flexibility as well. And thank you to the Robertsons, Chip and Carrie Robertson, for helping to make this happen. And of course, UCLA, Alison, and all of the staff. And in advance, a thank you to Connie Kasari, who I know will do a wonderful job in helping to facilitate a discussion that we will have with you all. So bear with me for a sec while I get my screen up. And we will move forward. There we go. Okay. So I've been asked to speak on neurodiversity in the classroom. Let me just begin by saying that the whole topic of neurodiversity, we're in such an exciting time. to be at a point where not only theoretically and in research, but clinically and educationally, things are evolving so rapidly. And I think you'll get a sense from my presentation how rapidly things are responding. Still a lot of differing opinions, as you would expect with such an evolving field. Disagreements. We will not have the time to get into some of the more divisive feelings or differences, but I probably will allude to them somewhat as we go along in the presentation. Just to give you an idea how we will progress, I know our audience will be quite diverse in your experience and your knowledge about neurodiversity. Many of you are practitioners. There might be parents out there, certainly people who are neurodivergent, autistic, and otherwise. So I'm going to begin with just some basic notions about neurodiversity, some of the differing opinions about how it should be defined and what's included under this umbrella. And then we will move ahead as quickly as possible into practical considerations that not only come from my years of consulting and clinical experience. I am a speech language pathologist by training, but I really consider myself a child development specialist. Most of my training was in that area and continues to be. So then we will move into more applied issues as we move ahead. And then hopefully our discussion can talk about the needs for the future, both in research and in clinical and educational application. So you saw classroom in my title, and I'd like to begin by saying, what's the classroom? I want to posit that the classroom really is life. We all know that children learn and develop trust with other people, trust with environments in so many different settings. So I would ask you all, let's think of the classroom and the school community as a microcosm and a metaphor for life, because so much of what we'll talk about certainly has implications outside of the defined classroom and the defined educational setting. So let's go back in time. Neurodiversity, the term itself, the credit's given to Judy Singer, and from a sociology thesis in 1998. I had the pleasure to meet Judy a number of years ago, pre-pandemic, in Sydney, Australia. I was on a panel with her, and she's a very, very modest person. She's autistic, and she basically said, you know, neurodiversity is just about that we all have different brains, and if we have different brains, we all experience the world differently, and that should be respected. By the way, there still is, most recently, some controversy out of the UK as to whether we should really give all the credit to Judy. That's other writers, maybe not using the term, but other writers had alluded to the concept of neurodiversity for many, many years. I even like to say that going back to my doctoral dissertation on echolalia in the 70s, it checks a lot of the boxes of kind of a neurodiversity foundation and tenets of practice, the way we looked at echolalia relative to individuals, kids who are autistic, who learn differently due to neurological differences. Okay. Samantha Kraft, who is an autistic self-advocate, and you'll see a lot of quotes from autistic people. They are my primary source of learning. And I'll also be talking about our podcast where we've interviewed more than 50 autistic people over the last 3 years. You'll get a lot more of that. So this is Samantha Kraft in 2019, who said, "The standard for neurodiversity is recognizing natural variations of human brains and minds as a valuable aspect of human diversity." And I don't have a slide on this, but John Elder Robison, one of the first proponents of a neurodiversity perspective, said just a few years ago, hey, wait a second, this has been going on since mankind. This is nothing new, and we have to recognize that. So initially, when neurodiversity, especially in the clinical fields, became a concept of value, it was given as a way to think about and connect even all of the different clinical categories that you see on this slide. I'm not going to name them for you. We have autism at the top, but then we know there are many co-occurring conditions, and many of these conditions occur without autism as a diagnosis. But the point is, initially, people thought of neurodiversity primarily in terms of the umbrella of clinically defined diagnoses, many of which, but not all of which, are defined in the DSM-5. But we also have to recognize that neurodiversity is now seen as a social justice movement. And Singer referred to neurological minorities in her work. And she was referring to people whose brains work differently. Interestingly, when we think of neurodiversity as a type of diversity, one place that we're really far behind, and it sounds like UCLA is addressing this, is looking at neurodiversity as one type of diversity in university DEI committees, for example. I'm going to talk a little bit later about Dr. Richard Grinker, who is a person I've learned a lot from and kind of a colleague. We've had him on our podcast. He is a professor of anthropology at George Washington University. He has a daughter, an adult daughter on the spectrum, and he has just been appointed to the DEI committee there. And he contacted me about a month ago and said, Barry, can we talk? Because he felt neurodiversity was totally left out of the DEI committee jurisdiction, if you will, at George Washington. There are a number of universities, yes, that clearly have put a focus on this. A very dear friend and colleague, Michael John Carley, who is autistic, and he's the NYU consultant on neurodiversity. He said there are only, in his opinion, 3 to 5 universities with good, solid neurodiversity programs under their DEI programs. Okay, so let's get a different perspective. And this is from Alex Kimmel, who is a neurodivergent individual who communicates through technology. And he refers to himself in his business as the self-determinator. And Alex says, neurodiversity is the acceptance and celebration of those that operate with what other than what most of the world considers to be normal, and to help society to realize no one really has the right to name what someone else's normal should be. And this perspective is clearly seen by his self-anointed title of the self-determinator. Obviously, he's saying maybe each individual should define what is normal for themselves, which can be considered to be an area of different opinions. For example, in the autism culture, is it that the world should really, really bend as much as possible to understand the autistic experience? Or should autistic people have to meet the world halfway and be able to kind of deal with neurotypical culture and neurotypical expectations, especially social expectations? Again, an area that's being discussed with a lot of passion right now. Personally, I got thrust, in a sense, into the neurodiversity discussion almost 10 years ago, actually, 9 years ago, when my book, Uniquely Human, the first edition, now it's in an expanded edition, was published within 2 weeks of the publication of Steve Silberman's international bestseller, Neurotribes. And of course, his book, I want to make it clear because Steve insists on this. Steve says he's not an autism expert. He is a science writer and wrote for Wired magazine for many years and approached this as a kind of a science project, if you will, and then got totally immersed in the autism community. And our books, when they first came out, by no efforts on our part, were reviewed as companion volumes by Nature magazine and other reviewers. And out of this, Steve and I became good friends, a bi-coastal relationship. So this is a photo of us. I'm in Rhode Island. This is a photo of us in Haight-Ashbury in a restaurant close to his home. If you ever have the chance to hear Steve speak or to learn from Steve, just jump at it. He's phenomenal. Okay, so let's talk for a moment why neurodiversity is important. Many of you know, and some of you may experience, the mental health issues that are often co-occurring. As a matter of fact, I would probably posit that mental health issues as secondary issues are some of the most challenging issues of people with a diagnosis of autism and also other neurodivergent conditions. So I'm going to quote from a 2022 survey by Chris Bonello. He is a self-advocate out of the UK who has kind of a superpower, as they say, for gathering large amounts of data through interviews, through questionnaires, crunching them and coming up with the patterns. So he did an international survey with more than 11,000 neurodivergent respondents, and more than 7,000 of those identified as autistic. And 70% of the autistic respondents either currently have or had a negative experience with school. And he found that there was little to no difference with the younger generation, which is kind of a sad comment. This isn't just for people who were in school years ago. It still is current. And I often talk about emotional memory as being something that's been ignored too much when looking at the challenges of autistic people. Emotional memory being that every event we experience in life, we also code with an emotional memory. And some other findings out of Chris's research is that of the respondents, 69% self-reported anxiety, anxiety that was challenging, 59% experienced depression, 36% experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. And so we know that trauma-informed work is now one of the buzzwords if we're working with neurodivergent people in general, because there is a large percentage of individuals who experience anxiety, who experiencing through, in some cases, trauma, significant mental health challenges. So I always say, sometimes this comes up in middle school or high school, that we need to be aware of this from preschool. Because if children begin to walk away with, in some cases, what they have referred to as traumatic memories, then, I mean, that sets the stage for life in terms of who they trust, what situations they will trust, and so forth. And we're going to talk about trust in much greater depth in a few minutes. So, continuing with Samantha Kraft's definition, neurodiversity refers specifically to neurological differences resulting in how one thinks, processes, perceives, behaves and reacts, copes, and I've added to this definition, communicates, moves, and also emotes. I would say one of the areas that's given very little attention are the movement disturbances that we see so often in autism. And this has become a major issue, especially with non-speakers who have various forms of motor speech disorders, as well as kind of another area of controversy, what's called apraxias. So let's get simple here, okay? A number of years ago, I was consulting to a third grade classroom, and the teacher was given permission by the parents of a couple of kids who are on the spectrum in the classroom to bring up the subject of autism. The kids were aware of their diagnosis, which is an early start, and it's a good start. And the class came up with a definition, this was their consensus. Autism means that you are really good at some things and not so good at other things, which in part, you know, we could certainly generalize the whole concept of neurodiversity. And I want to give a quick shameless plug and a shout out here. For the podcast I've been doing for more than 3 years, my co-host and partner and co-producer is autistic. It's Dave Finch. And we've developed a very close friendship over the last 5-6 years, going back before the podcast. And basically, a lot of the things that I'm kind of lousy at, he's really good at. And a lot of the things that I'm really good at, he's not so good at. And we recognize that, and we talk about that, and we put it on the table. I think it's important for us to have those discussions. Those discussions should go on in classrooms. Some very talented teachers already do that, with all of the kids talking about either what they're good. I mean, it goes a little bit beyond what's your favorite ice cream flavor, you know? It really is self-awareness of your abilities and where you need help and where you don't need help, and how we shouldn't be judgmental of people who also have skewed profiles. And almost by definition, people who are along that long continuum of neurodiversity have sometimes more extreme skewed profiles in abilities. Okay, so here's an extreme example of not only can you see differences, but sometimes those differences are not just deficits. So on our podcast, this happened to be our 83rd episode, we had a wonderful interview with Tara Vance, who is the founder and CEO of Neuroclastic, which is really kind of a social justice website for autistic and neurodivergent individuals. And in our interview, what Tara shared with us was the following. I am autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, and I have a traumatic brain injury. I have a lot of differences navigating the world, and almost all of them are an advantage in some contexts and a disadvantage in others. She also shared with us that she grew up in Appalachia, really in a community in poverty, and she was not exposed to a lot of good quality educational experiences when she was young. So there is the societal impact as well in terms of your learning experience and how you grow up. Of course, one of the greatest and earliest voices to share her views of autism, and especially of the strengths and talents and interests that we need to focus on was Temple Grandin. So about 18 years ago, I was co-hosting a conference with an agency I've worked with for 25 years called Community Autism Resources. It's a parent-founded, parent-run agency in Massachusetts. And we had a large conference. The theme for the conference that year was identifying and building interests, strengths, and talents for people with autism. And so here's a much younger Barry interviewing Temple. I've had the pleasure to get to know her pretty well over the years, hosting her at least 3 times and spending time with her. So here's an interview from 18 years ago. Temple, as you know, the conference is about identifying and building strengths and nurturing talents for people with autism. Could you talk a little bit about how that has influenced your life and the types of people and events that really encouraged you to expand it?
Well, I mean, art ability showed up early, and that was always encouraged. You know, art materials were made available. I had art lessons. I got a book on perspective drawing. When I did something really nice in art, it was encouraged. And one time I painted a really nice watercolor of a beach, and my mother thought it was good enough to put it in a professional frame and put it on the wall with the grown-up pictures. Well, getting that kind of recognition was good. You know, we got to take the thing that is the area of strength. Because one of the problems with people on the spectrum is the skills will be uneven. Often good at one thing, bad at something else.
Okay, so we will be applying that to real life in just a few minutes as we talk about practical implications. But most of you know that Temple has a book called Developing Talents, and her life is a testimonial to her mother nurturing her interests and now leading that to be for her one of the world's leading animal scientists outside of autism. I mean, she is so highly respected in the field of animal science and has published as much in animal science as she has in autism. So we see that playing out in popular media and culture now. Think about Greta Thunberg, the climate activist, person of the year for Time magazine. Brilliant and talented. And people sometimes say, oh yeah, despite her autism, look at what she's done. Cody Lee, who a few years ago won America's Got Talent, a blind autistic young man. So we have to ask the question, in each of these cases, and in many, many more, of course, are they brilliant and talented despite their autism, or due at least in part to their autism? So here's a quote that I heard recently from Greta Thunberg, and it had to do with her being on the spectrum. And she said, being on the spectrum helps me cut through the bullshit, okay? And if you really look at what she's done in her achievements in climate activism, it's that. You know, she's cutting through a lot of the bullshit. I mean, she just says things that are just so clear and accurate and data-based as far as what is going on in the world and how she feels that those of us who are older, who are basically destroying Earth for her generation and generations to come. Okay, so let's turn now towards applied issues. First of all, I think the whole purpose of this talk and for all the work that so many of you are doing out there is to shift our perspective to a neurodiversity lens and shift away from a medical model lens and shift away from a deficit lens. And I think that'll become clear as we move ahead here. So we could ask the question, and this is now one of the buzz terms many of you are aware of, what are neuroaffirming educational practices? So in the most general sense, I'd like to offer this. It's providing support that embraces and respects the incredible diversity of neurotypes or types of brains. So I wouldn't say that it's a quote that I came up with specifically, but certainly I've kind of synthesized that from a lot of the readings that I've been doing over the years and recently. What I want to turn it to more specifically is an issue that really I learned a lot from my friend and colleague, Michael John Carley. And that is focusing on the area of trust, which ended up being a two-part article that he and I published together, as well as a chapter in my book. And that is, in a sense, you can think of autism specifically as a disability of trust. And in the book, I spoke about trust in one's own body. And you could certainly see that with a lot of non-speakers, a lot of people who have major sensory issues. But we're going to talk about trust in the physical environment in terms of the school setting. Secondly, trust in the world. What about our journey through every day? The activities and routines that we go through in the way we structure our lives. And then finally, trust in others, which in a school perspective would include teachers and therapists, other children, classmates. And there's a big difference often between classmates specifically and schoolmates who may not have the intimate encounters with classmates on a regular basis. I often have seen classmates kind of stick up for or try to help schoolmates understand their friend in the class to prevent bullying and other stressors. And then finally, family members. Again, any one of these topics we could spend a half a day or a day on, but certainly how parents see their kids and how brothers and sisters see their kids, support their kids. Their brothers and sisters are embarrassed by their brothers and sisters and what they do, how they act, or how they defend their brothers and sisters. Okay, so let's begin with trust in the physical environment. I don't think I need to, give you a lecture on the sensory challenges and violations. I think one of the areas that a lot of people don't understand is so often we focus on the hypersensitivities, the tactile defensiveness, the auditory sensitivities, the visual sensitivities, and so forth. What we focus less on are the hyposensitivities, because we know if you are underreactive, you don't register sensory information from the environment, that could also be very, very challenging in terms of being responsive, people thinking you're not listening, people thinking you're, hearing impaired. Another aspect of the physical environment is how physical space is used, how it's organized. So we're going to talk in just a couple of minutes about the importance of getaway spaces, spaces for chill out, refueling time that's often needed. I'm a dear friend and colleague and co-author of our educational framework, which is called the CERTS model, Dr. Amy Laurent. She is doing work right now with her autistic colleague, Jacqueline Fady, and they, under the business name of Autism Level Up, and they talk a lot about how so often people on the spectrum are running on fumes. And we have to help autistic people have ways to reflect on their energy levels and when they need to refill their gas tanks. Very important. As a matter of fact, Jacqueline Fady, who's a development psychologist and autistic, talks that she doesn't experience emotions. She experiences different levels of energy that result in how she reacts. Flex room strategy. A few years ago, I published a two-part article on the importance of getaway spaces for kids in inclusive settings. And initially, folks would say, well, wait a second, isn't that anti-inclusion if you're talking about special settings? resource rooms. A flex room is like a flexible resource room, but it isn't just for academic support. It is for emotional regulatory support. You know, when you're running on fumes, you need a place to go to where you could put a little bit more gas in your tank, or if you're on electricity, putting some more energy in your battery. Very important. So at even higher levels internationally, we're beginning to see a lot of attention paid to this by some people. On our podcast, episode 69, we interviewed a brilliant woman, Dr. Magda Mostafa. Magda is a professor of architectural design. She's at the University of Cairo in Egypt. She is Canadian. And she is considered one of the world's preeminent architects about autism-friendly design. And she has designed schools. She's now getting involved in designing urban environments. And she was a renowned architect to begin with anyway, but she's applied all of her work now to autism and neurodivergent friendly circumstances. Very, very important work that she does. Great podcast. Okay, so what does it look like in schools? Well, kindergarten, preschools, or even early elementary, it might be getaway spaces. It might be a friendly, calming book corner. On the right side, you see a youngster in a tent that's in his classroom that he can get away to if needed. So we know, and so many autistic people are saying, you know, sometimes I feel the world's crashing down on me. I can't deal with the sensory input, whether it be auditory, whether it be visual, and to the point of having meltdowns in public environments. So what we are beginning to see is changes happening, you know, and this, I consider this beyond autism-friendly films being shown in theaters. So this is my friend Ezra. He is the son of my colleague, Tom Fields Meyer, who worked on my book with me. And if you can read this, this is actually the Portland, Oregon airport. And it says, "Welcome all neurodiverse passengers." Here's a sensory room. And here's Ezra leaving the room after he had taken a break. And we do know how airports can be. Moving ahead. So if we want to increase the sense of trust, I just mentioned physical environments, we have to do that as well with basically the flow of life during the day, trust in activities and routines. The notion of predictability has become a huge issue over the last few years. Actually, I remember I taught my first full semester course on autism in 1979, believe it or not. And I had handouts about structure does not equal rigidity. Structure equals predictability and consistency. Now, the flip side of predictability is uncertainty. And I do not need, I don't have to belabor the point of how uncertainty is stress-inducing for all of us. I mean, the pandemic really drove that home. But uncertainty has always been an area that has been very, very challenging for people on the spectrum. So I always like to say, you know, we all benefit from predictability, but many neurodivergent, especially autistic people, crave predictability. I mean, if the world is perceived as a buzzing confusion much of the time, then predictability clearly is an antidote against that. Certainly, many of you are educators. Learning that makes sense and is relevant to the lives of the people we're talking about, especially those individuals who may have difficulty extracting from learning symbolic information and relating it to their everyday lives. Very, very important. Again, things that you all know about: use of effective learning supports, visual supports, schedules. When we talk about, you know, we used to say all autistic people are stronger visual processors than auditory processors. Well, that's not true. Now we've learned that there are some autistic people who actually are more effective auditory processors, but it seems like the majority clearly benefit from visual supports, visual schedules, concretizing abstract information such as time. Something we really, really have pushed for years in the CERTS model for 20 years is the availability of emotional regulatory supports. And then finally, movement is absolutely critical in the school setting, where too often we feel that a good student who's one that could sit for 45 minutes to an hour. Well, that might be actually a very, very dysregulating circumstance, even for older students. So we have to recognize that movement is one of the universal physiological regulators for all of us, and that needs to be built into neuroaffirming programs, regardless of age. So I've just borrowed from the SLP, Speech Language Pathologists, Neurodiversity Collective, what they call self-advocacy phrases. I would refer to this as an emotional regulatory choice board in terms of what do I need now. I'm not going to read it all through you, but I need quiet, for example. I need my headphones. If there's aversive auditory input, I need to lie down, and then some issues having to do with physiological regulation. I feel hungry, I feel thirsty, and so forth. Okay, and I've been looking forward for some time to share this with you. This is Go UCLA, okay? I have the great privilege now of being a mentor for an occupational therapy student in the doctoral program at Duke University. And that happens to be Belden Long, who was a star player on the UCLA soccer team on the Bruins in 2015. So if you look at the upper left of this photo, that is Belden. So Belden and I have been meeting regularly for almost a year now, and she is doing research, working with the agency that I work with, on asking parents how accessible are opportunities for physical well-being and health and sports activities in the community. And she's interviewed 70 parents up until now, and she is already developing a guidebook that's going to be called Promoting Physical Health and Well-Being in Everyday Life, because her whole philosophy as a yoga teacher, as a high-level athlete, is it shouldn't have to be organized activities that kids are accepted into, that parents should have guidance about what they could do every day in the home to promote physical health and well-being. So, yay Bruins and yay Belden. Okay, finally, the third area, with the goal of increasing a sense of trust and belonging in school, is trust in others. Feeling heard is very, very important, especially for individuals who have limited conventional means of communication. You're going to see that, obviously, for non-speaking individuals, especially those who have not had the benefit of an augmentative alternative communication system, so important. But there are other ways that a person can feel heard. For example, honoring protests and refusals. We talk about self-determination as part of neurodiversity. Is it important that we recognize that it's okay sometimes for students to say pass, or to say no, or to say I need a break, or to say I just don't want to do that right now? So when it's appropriate, I mean, unfortunately, that is still thrown into the category of quote unquote non-compliance. Yet there might be, as I like to say, 5 or 6 very, very good reasons not to comply. As a matter of fact, one of the most powerful forms of communication is to protest and refuse using socially acceptable means, because research indicates that up to 70% of problematic, quote unquote, problematic behavior are socially undesirable ways to express protest and refusal. Very important. Regulation should be monitored and supported, okay? And and mutual regulation must be available. And that has to do with helping an individual through our relationship, a trusting relationship with another person. Also, we have to recognize there is a sense now that's growing of the authentic self of an autistic person. And that it's not necessarily based upon neurotypical behavior and neurotypical standards. And I think stimming, there are other examples, but stimming is one of the greatest examples that a lot of autistic people now talk about, and we've spoken about this for decades, how stimming may be a self-regulatory strategy for emotional and physiological self-regulation. And so is it okay for students to stim? A few years ago, it would be stop that behavior. And now in neuroaffirming classrooms, Kids can choose things to stim on as long as it's not distracting or interfering in the classroom setting. And then, of course, other children feeling welcome in activities and having an investment in a relationship with a child who's maybe autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. So we interviewed on our podcast over the last 3 years, we have interviewed 4 non-speakers. One of them happened to be Elizabeth Bonker. You might be familiar with Elizabeth. Elizabeth made the mainstream national media 2 years ago when she was, as a non-speaking autistic young woman, she was the valedictorian at Rollins College. And she gave her speech through speech-generated output on her computer. And as part of that speech, you need to go on YouTube and listen to the whole speech. It's incredible. She said, personally, I have struggled my whole life to be heard. And even though she's a brilliant young woman, and even though she's so articulate through her computer-generated speech, she said, even now, people still do not believe her, listen to her, and hear her. And that is just criminal. So here's a little video, a wonderful little video. It's a little guy I don't know, but it's about a youngster who has discovered the value of feeling his authentic self, and it speaks for itself.
We're all what? The same.
We're all the same.
Most 4th graders were working on a project about autism awareness when 11-year-old Rumari Zales asked her a question.
He saw this puzzle piece. He said, "That's me. Can I say something?"
Turns out this little kid was about to teach a big lesson.
You guys are doing this. This is something I like to do, and I have autism.
He described what it's like to have autism, asking his classmates for understanding.
See other people who actually have it and make them feel like a somebody. Hey.
Even taking questions. Rumari's mom used to worry about her son fitting in.
Will he be bullied? Will he make friends?
Now she hopes this video gives others a glimpse into what she already knows about him.
He's so unapologetically proud to be who he is. And I think that speaks volumes.
I literally felt so confident. I didn't feel nervous at all. I felt me. I felt me.
A surprise show and tell.
They're just the way they are, like you are, Mari.
And an education for every one of us.
I love it. I felt me. Couldn't be more clear.
We're all what?
Okay. So what do we do with this new knowledge that we're still bringing forth and learning from our experiences and from families and from autistic and neurodivergent people? Let's demystify this notion of neurodiversity. I mean, to the lay public, they may hear that and turn the other way. Oh, yeah, it's kind of complex stuff. It's not so complex. Let's teach others. And I know I've learned to reflect upon myself and what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, when I need help, and so forth. Let's focus on interests, strengths, and talents, which we're going to shift to in just a couple of minutes. And let's recognize and respect neurodivergent differences in communication and socialization. That was a big part of my doctoral dissertation. Let's not see echolalia, as it used to be called, as psychotic speech that needs to be extinguished. Let's understand that for a lot of individuals, it's a way of expressing different communicative functions, and it may be an alternative strategy for language acquisition, which is now called a Gestalt language acquisition strategy. Let's understand differences in learning style. We should have been doing that a long time ago anyway. And let's understand differences in emotional and physiological regulation. So we just saw Rumari saying, okay, I do this, and he's saying, I like to do that, and for whatever reason, he's explaining it, and he's basically saying that's part of me, so please understand that, and don't get on me for that. Of course, with kids, we want to build that self-awareness and self-knowledge. I really believe building self-awareness is so key for more successful quality of life and outcomes. The autistic people that I work with and I'm friends with, hang out with, their self-awareness is unbelievable, almost at a level beyond some of my neurotypical friends. And I think it's very, very important to start from very, very early on, supporting parents and family members in having a more positive lens in looking at their child. And I'll be sharing some information with you about that shortly. Challenging pathologizing language and attitudes. I love a dichotomy that, or at least a difference that I was just exposed to not so long ago. You know, we talk about kids with challenging and problematic behavior. Well, why don't we talk about the kids for whom we give challenging reputations, such as he's an aggressive student? Once that gets into a kid's file, my goodness, that often follows them for years. Let's build neuroaffirming communities, which my talk and a lot of what you guys all do out there is what we're talking about. And there are different levels and layers of community, as you know. It could be a classroom, it could be the school, it could be the town, it could be the neighborhood, it could be society in general. And we're making slow progress on each one of those levels right now. But we need to start at the micro levels of community and not just focus on the macro levels. So I want to share with you something that Dave and I on our podcast, we received this from a parent. And it's not to toot our horn, it's to show what a difference challenging pathologizing language could make. So a mom sent this to us not so long ago, just a few months ago. And it's about our podcast. Thank you for helping parents like myself and for changing the language we use to describe our loved ones. Because of your podcast, I went into my IEP listening to the language that was being used by school officials, and instead of feeling sad and defeated, I felt empowered and positive. When they began with all the things my son couldn't do, I quickly and confidently said, "Do you know last year he was hitting himself and running away from the school psychologist? And this year he sat and he answered 2 questions? That was amazing. And that's what I call progress." What could they say to a proud mother who was unwilling to buy into all the negativity? Not much. I continued with my enthusiastic language regarding my son, my 14-year-old son, who was always doing his very best. I felt in control. I wouldn't allow what I perceived as being negative comments regarding my star student. So just in a few weeks, we have our 26th annual parent retreat, and I look forward, weekend retreat, and I look forward to hearing more comments like this from parents, because a lot of what the parents talk about, we're talking about up to 60 parents together for a weekend in a very laid back, non-judgmental atmosphere. And a lot of what they share is what they face in the community and what they face in school meetings and so forth as the largest stressors in their life. One parent said, I'll never forget it. You know, this autism thing, we kind of, you know, we know how to deal with that. Yep, we're doing fine with that. It's outside of the family that we receive the most pushback and experience the most stress. Okay. So let's talk about interests, strengths, and talents. Here's a quote that I lifted, actually was given by a Māori elder in New Zealand. For a number of years, I consulted to the Ministry of Education in New Zealand and talk about cultural differences. The Māori, not truly the indigenous people, the Polynesian people who went over to New Zealand around 1200, they are respected to the extent that the local iwi or the local tribe is invited to give a prayer in front of any kind of public gathering, including a workshop on early intervention. So I was there to do that. And after I met members of the tribe and we went through this ceremony, he said to me, actually whispered in my ear, "Barry, I hope you convey the message that in order to advance the mind, you must first energize the spirit." I was very moved by that comment. And what does that mean? Energize the spirit. And how do we do that? And right away, I thought one way we do that is really look at what kids love to do, what they know they're good at, what we call enthusiasm. What are their enthusiasms? So this is only one way to energize the spirit that I believe is very much a part of what we should do under neuroaffirming practices. So again, we can go into great detail, but with time limitations, I'm going to buzz through this. Number one, we have to look for areas of interest, strengths, and enjoyment. What captures the child's attention? Where do we see a lot of positive emotion or excitement? What rivets the child's attention? Which activities do they stay with the longest? If they ask a lot of questions, what do they ask questions about? We have to understand that we shouldn't expect why some of these interests exist. Some of these interests might be what we refer to as, well, not exactly mainstream, a little bit unconventional. So we shouldn't judge those interests, but let's think creatively of how we can expand those interests. So here's a story. Here's a young man who I first met when he was 4 or 5 years of age. And his mom sent a little book in that we can give Max, his name is Max, during breaks. And it was a book of pictures of vacuum cleaners. And not just any vacuum cleaners, they needed to be auric vacuum cleaners, okay? And a few years ago, many, many years since he was 4 or 5, his mom sent me this photo. And that Max, when he finally made enough money, the first thing he bought from his job in working in a garden center was his own auric vacuum cleaner. So sometimes these interests last for many, many years. Why vacuum cleaners? Who knows? And by the way, there's a good neurodiversity lesson here. Some of you are saying, wait a second, vacuum cleaners, wouldn't he be auditorily hypersensitive to that as many autistic kids are? No, his general profile was more of a hyposensitive profile, which means he liked more intensive input. He liked the vibration of the vacuum cleaner. Therefore, his mom shared with us that they had the cleanest rugs in town, but very different from another child who might be hypersensitive. Okay, we shouldn't just look at the interest and say, oh, isn't that cool? He draws really well. Or he's got a great memory for music, or he does puzzles terrifically, whatever it might be. Or he's a Lego king. We should nurture those interests and help find a place for it in a child's life. The individuals I know who are most succeeding on their talents, who are autistic, like Matt Savage, the internationally known jazz composer and pianist. We've known Matt since he was 9 or 10. A young man named Justin Canna, who I often share his art with people. It wasn't just that they showed some early seeds of talent. In both cases, their families nurtured those talents, bringing people into their lives to help them. So let's try to understand the qualities that may underlie the interest, and how can it relate to everyday routines and activities. So here's a video of a young man. It's a terrific video, not a young man I know personally, who showed some abilities, and I might even say savant abilities for music. And here he is, and I believe it's with his dad. And it fits so well if any of you saw the recent Billy Joel 100th anniversary Madison Square Garden concert, a place where I spent a lot of time as a kid, by the way. And look at how this becomes an activity of sharing, joining, social referencing, shared emotional affect, taking roles, giving instructions to his dad. All of the things that as a speech language pathologist saying, boy, he's an active communicator, but it's within the context of his passion. Bear with me one sec. There we go.
By Billy Joel.
Next to his dad. Sing it now. Okay, now it's my time. Okay, let's sing it together. Sing it together. Look at the shared positive emotion. We're doing this together. Okay, so you get the sense of what's going on there. And let me just say, as a speech language pathologist and the co-author of a curriculum in social communication, he's checking a lot of the boxes right there. That is happening because of his interest, attention, and his passion, and understanding this is a shared activity. So, how can the interest be employed in new and different ways? Let's expand it. So a couple of stories here very quickly. On the left, you see a Winnie the Pooh calendar. This is from a kindergarten. And initially, I was consulting where the young boy in the kindergarten, inclusive kindergarten, had difficulties staying in the morning meeting, looking at calendar and so forth. And his mom said, well, he loves Winnie the Pooh. You know, he loves all the characters. He loves Roo. He loves Eeyore. How about if we make the calendar time a Winnie the Pooh calendar time? And what she actually did was she brought in stickers, and the teacher put, you know, Monday was Eeyore Day, Tuesday was Winnie the Pooh Day, Wednesday was Roo Day. And not only did this solve the problem of this young man attending and participating, but all of the kids joined into the Winnie the Pooh calendar culture. And they started referring to the days as Monday's the Winnie the Pooh Day and so forth. So that's kindergarten level. On the right side, a few years ago, I was co-facilitating a Miracle Project program. And those of you who are based in California or based in the world or based in LA, you need to know of Elaine Hall's Miracle Project, which is a phenomenal program that we've replicated on the East Coast. And this had to do with the settle-in time. The kids were coming in, and the first thing as the students came in, and these were pretty much like 8 to 15-year-old students. They would settle in, they would take some paper, they would take some markers and just draw whatever they wanted to draw before we started the more organized activities. And there was one young man who came in, and he would take the paper and pencil, but just sit on the floor and kind of zone out, you know, a little low arousal. And he would sit there and zone out. And we were hoping that, you know, it would be an activity to kind of settle him in and move ahead. And I knew he liked percussion instruments, and I'm a drummer and a percussionist. So I just went over to him and I said, Freddie, hey, you know, I think you like xylophones. And he looked up at me like he had just awakened out of sleep. He went, xylophone. And he immediately started drawing a glockenspiel, a vibraphone, a marimba, and then other instruments. And he was so proud of it. And with the other students, they hung it up on the wall so they could all share what they drew during the settle-in time. But it was almost like a spark of adrenaline to him to hear something about what he enjoyed. And this is a young man who did not have a lot of creative language. He had some creative language, spoken language. He still communicated through echolalia and also used some visual supports in communicating. Okay, so I'm going to share with you another video. This comes from the BBC about how passions could lead to so many other things. This is a young man who's 13 years of age, and it speaks for itself.
When I didn't have my flagpole, I would focus more on the stress of the day, and I would feel very tense and very anxious. But when I have a flagpole, when I don't get up thinking, oh no, it's a new day, I get up thinking, good, let's put the flag up on the flagpole. Bhutan is one of my favorite flags. And I really like Bhutan because obviously it's got the dragon, and it's got the dragon on its flag because in Bhutan they believe the sound of thunder is the dragon. So hence why it's called the thunder dragon.
The reaction from the neighbours has been fantastic. They thought it had something to do with the World Cup, but it's got nothing to do with the World Cup at all. And we had one knock on our door to ask us what it was about, just because they were interested. And the next thing we know, it's gone viral on a Lymington Facebook page, and everybody wants to know what the flag of the day is.
Now, Patos Teani,
It's a way of blocking out what's been overwhelming him in the day and calming him down very much. Okay, is this okay? So it is escapism, and it's also fantastic education, because it's not just about the flags. He knows the capital cities, he knows something about the politics, he's got interesting facts, he knows where every single country is in the world, he knows countries are there.
I like flags because of their representation of the nation, the symbolism behind flags. I know every flag in the world.
So we could talk for about a half hour about that video. Everything from his self-esteem to his identity as an expert on flags to what it's done in the neighborhood for the family and how much mom appreciates his interests. Now, obviously, he's by any standard, he's an incredibly bright young man, but he himself has expanded that particular interest in so many ways. So who knows? Maybe he'll be a cultural anthropologist, a geographer. I mean, who knows? But clearly, it's a passion, and it feeds his sense of self in so many positive ways. So we also, though, want to make connections with others with similar interests. So here's a couple of photos. There's a Lego club. You know, you could say, well, he talks obsessively about this topic in school about Legos, and put him or her in a Lego club, and they are the most competent and knowledgeable, right? Cooking clubs. I love cooking clubs for many, many reasons. It's not only is it practical, but it also leads to something that everybody can enjoy together as a social experience. This is one of my colleagues, Emily Rubin, who is helping to facilitate a discussion group in a school. And these are young boys talking about action movies. They love action movie heroes, and they come and they speak together about that to work on conversation, asking each other's questions. What did you like about this? Others' opinions. So what are some of the benefits of a neurodiversity ability-based approach? And this is kind of in summary a little bit. It enhances self-esteem, confidence, a sense of self. Certainly, it motivates and fosters communication, self-expression, and engaging with others and developing relationships. I mean, think about it. We all develop relationships with people with common interests. It certainly supports emotional regulation. So going back to the video that we just saw, mom said it's a form of escapism. I would kind of rephrase that. It's a way that he regulates. I don't get up in the morning thinking about how anxious I am about the day. I think, okay, I need to put a flag up on the flagpole. A nice regulating aspect of his routine. And in a lot of our other work, we talk about developing emotional regulation plans in place of or instead of behavior plans. It may lead to hobbies, leisure activities, or employment, may improve quality of life for both the child and the family. And for educational staff, for those of you who are educators, therapists, but for all of us really, it enhances understanding of individual differences. And that was stated very, very upfront by Alison in terms of one of the focuses in the core tenets of the UCLA program in neurodiversity. Assessment methods need to be strength-based and family-centered and authentic, okay? It also encourages the use of multimodal teaching rather than sit down, all the information you get is through spoken language, because we know that just doesn't work for so many neurodivergent individuals. But it also emphasizes the need for multimodal accommodations, okay? Emotional regulation is huge and always has been in our work. And it really does talk about that if we understand what I said much earlier, that secondary mental health issues, anxiety, depression, are now becoming recognized as the most challenging aspects of other neurodivergent conditions. Also, on a very practical level, a neuroaffirming approach increases collaboration and co-teaching to foster inclusive practices. So just some examples as we move to our last few minutes. We have to understand that a neurodiversity ability-based approach, looking through that lens, changes perceptions. So a few years ago, I was consulting in a Virginia school. It's an elementary school. And I was just so impressed when I followed a class with 2 autistic students into the music room. And the music teacher, who was, I found out to be incredible, he highlighted the abilities of his autistic students. What did he do? One autistic student had the rather unique ability to memorize aidas from operas, okay? And one student produced this wonderful piece from an Italian opera, singing in perfect pitch. Another student had perfect pitch and could pick out tunes on the piano. And he showed off their abilities. And I asked him afterwards, what you did was incredible. Why do you do that? And he said, I always highlight the abilities of my autistic students. It levels the playing field. And then, very different example, I was in a classroom focusing on a young child on the spectrum, inclusive 2nd grade classroom, who would scream when there would be intrusive sounds. And he just happened to scream when there was an intrusive sound in the classroom. And a little girl named Lisa came over to me right away and said, you know, Chris gets upset and screams when things get too loud, but he's the best reader in the class. And I found out and I observed that Christopher was hyperlexic, which means he had a precocious self-taught decoding ability that the teacher used when she was reading to the class, and he often was asked to read the instructions again or read the book with the teacher. And his comprehension was coming in. That's a whole other area of interest of mine, and hyperlexia and how it relates to echolalia. Moving ahead. So let's share what some parents say. I had mentioned earlier Dr. Richard Grinker, the chair of the Department of Anthropology, now the head of their DEI committee at the University of George Washington University. This is what he said on our podcast. My daughter's autism, her consistent happiness, and our unconditional love for her challenged everything I thought about traditional values like independence and autonomy. Disabilities connect people in relationships of care and reciprocity, and that to be dependent and interdependent is to be human. So there is a big pushback against this notion of independence is the goal for our students. That real life is about interdependence. And many friends of mine who have a bully pulpit as autistic self-advocates are emphasizing that right now. So I want to share a couple of things from our parent retreat. Here's an episode we did in our parent retreat. The young woman in the middle happens to be my wife, Dr. Elaine Meyer. And on the right, Barbara Domain, the founder, former executive director of Community Autism Resources in Massachusetts. And I'm putting this up because the next few segments will be from our parent retreat. And here's a mom who talks about the pressure she always felt to fix her child. And what I really want to get across here is if you have a neurodiversity lens and understanding everybody learns differently, everybody learns on their own pace, everybody needs their own supports and accommodations, it relieves some of that pressure from the need to fix a child and make them, especially on the extreme end, neurotypical. Oh, I should say, this is in our closing circle at the retreat, which is one of the most powerful experiences I have every year. 60 parents talking about what they've learned from other parents in the 2 full days of the retreat.
Actually, I started off this weekend tearing up, but I had tears in my eyes because I realized how beautiful these children are, and how beautiful our children are. I'll get through. Everybody give me deep breaths. Yeah, whole. They really, really are. And this weekend reinforced for me how, so, and I felt it in all of us, but how, God, for years now, I kept trying to fix Patrick. Keep trying to fix him, and the disappointment, and there was certainly joy in there. And what I learned was that he is home, and he's happy. And then, he's actually here now with me. Oh, this is so messy. Thank you for your opinions. And as I was talking with people, the weekend, I just want to like hug everyone and say, let our children help fix us and really kind of chill out. And yeah, we do need to pursue the B12 or whatever it might be to make their lives there and are happy, but they really are whole and they're beautiful, and let them fix us because we need it.
And so I'm claiming that a neurodiversity lens allows parents especially to take that kind of window. And so we have to see that attitude is the mind's paintbrush. It colors all we see. Here are, this is from a mom, a quote from her, from our parent retreat closing circle. I have a blind husband and 2 autistic children. People look at us like we're weird, but I think we really are hip. So be hip like we really are. This is a message to all the other parents. Okay. So what's the big picture of the importance of a neurodiversity lens? A deeper understanding of neurodiversity builds trust with students, adults, and families, and it makes our communities more humane and caring. And it makes us all better people because it allows us to reflect on our wrinkles, as a man named Ari Neiman once said. Nobody lives a life unwrinkled, okay? And with that humility, being much, much more capable of embracing the differences in other people. So here's a quote from Elizabeth Bonker, who I mentioned earlier, from our interview with her. Actually, I'm sorry, this is from her valedictorian speech. Life is for service. And she lifted that quote from Mr. Rogers, and do what you can with what you have and where you are. And there's our podcast. And now it is time for us to shift and open up for questions and discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Barry. That was an amazing primer on neurodiversity, and I really appreciate your perspective on this topic. This is kind of our new normal, I think, neurodiversity. So I have a whole series of questions from people in the audience. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to summarize a little bit, okay?
Sure.
But that's great. So, largely neurodiversity is associated with autism, and you presented on a lot of different adults, primarily with autism, some children. But one of the things that we know about autism is if you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person. There's so much incredible heterogeneity, both with how people present and also in how they respond to different supports or interventions. And so you've presented on adults that are verbal and, pretty, I guess, functional, if we can use that term, as adults, and kind of thinking back to their schooling experiences. I too have interviewed some of these folks, and I've interviewed lots of students in schools. And what I really am impressed by is how the students who are going through something in the moment don't always share these perspectives. For example, they might be getting bullied at school, but they may not be that aware of it. And so you didn't really talk as much about inclusion or inclusion models. I think of neurodiversity as a little bit different than inclusion, right? So inclusion in a classroom is really celebrating diversity in all of its forms, which may mean that children come to the classroom with intellectual disability or, you know, pretty significant learning challenges. So I'm wondering, and I think some of our audience are wondering, what can a teacher do with maybe 20 to 30 other students? What kinds of targeted supports do you find really work in helping them sort of include and listen to and target supports for the whole spectrum of autism?
Yeah, great question. And your question really does beg the concept and topic of universal design for learning. That we clearly see that what we often put in as supports for neurodivergent and autistic students benefits so many of the other students. And I gave the example of kind of craving predictability versus benefiting from predictability. I see the same thing in learning environments, benefiting from visual supports or absolutely needing visual supports to learn if you're not able to sit in a classroom and process information presented through auditory language. So, I mean, it's one of the greatest challenges that teachers face, and that is addressing the individual profiles and needs of students who may vary greatly in their learning style, in their emotional regulatory capacities. But I can only speak for my consulting experience, and that is things such as regular movement breaks, things such as multimodal teaching, things such as a teacher feeling supported by therapists coming into the classroom and co-teaching. I think that can benefit all students, regardless of whether they have a need for extra supports or not.
Yeah, I think, you know, sometimes in our low resource schools, our public school settings, there aren't therapists to go in, and nor are they necessarily what would be expected. But there are these different co-teaching models, which we don't employ as often as we should. And I think, I don't know if you have thoughts about sort of teacher training. There were a lot of questions about, you know, what do we do if the teacher, we don't want to identify our student with autism because we're worried about stigma and that it'll follow them around year to year. But teachers need to sort of know something. How do teachers sort of manage this with a whole classroom of individuals and the worry that parents have about stigmatizing the individual?
Well, the way to preclude and, if you will, inoculate a student against the stigma is to talk about it openly, is to go ahead and, as I said, educate the community about neurodiversity. The same way that video I showed of the young boy in the classroom. Obviously, autism is not a dirty word, or at least a deficit-filled word to the other students in the class. And you would hope that would expand to the school. Like I could share, you know, if time allowed, a lot of other examples of a class developing a book for other students in the elementary school about autism because they saw their classmate who's on the spectrum being misunderstood. And I think clearly that's where we're moving right now, especially with the self-advocate movement, saying, let's talk about autism openly. Let's get rid of the misconceptions of what autism is. And that's clearly one of the battles we're fighting right now. As long as, and Temple Grandin has said this, as long as autism is only seen as less than, as opposed to different than, it still creates the fertile ground for stigma. But if we can get that notion of less than out of the equation, then, and put the notion of difference in the equation, I think it benefits everybody. It may sound very idealistic, but we've taken some steps in that direction already.
Yeah. So you recommend that parents actually tell their child that they have autism and that they're out, sort of, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. And it's no longer, well, hey, Monday morning, you know, honey, you're autistic. There are now processes. Dr. Stephen Shore has a 4-step process of disclosure. Okay. And now it's been written, and he spoke about that on our podcast as well. And it starts with the neurodiversity perspective. Everybody has strengths and challenges. It just so happens through this process, We're going to help you understand at the end of the process, however long it takes. And Stephen says sometimes it takes a day, sometimes it takes weeks or months. The end of the process, we say, and there's a label that's called. Those differences that you demonstrate, and the label happens to be this. So you've already destigmatized it through the process.
Mm-hmm. So other questions had to do with behavioral challenges, and you and I would both agree that, you know, behavioral challenges are communication. But when you have somebody who's very intellectually disabled, not able to speak, actually can't use an augmentative system, and
not yet able to use an augmentative system.
Not yet able, but may have had a, you know, and these are the kinds of kiddos that I work a lot with, and we work a lot with them. Some of them it never takes for maybe, I don't know how long, you know.
Right.
And yes, you keep trying for sure. But what does a teacher do in terms of sort of handling that within the classroom structure? How do you know when a child's, another question was, if a child's refusal to do something is a challenging behavior, how much do you allow that, and how much do you, you know, what strategies do you have?
Yeah, and you know, this is a big part of the work that I do with my colleagues, and we kind of distill it down to the notion of you have to ask the deep why, okay? And the deep why is not the functional behavioral assessment why. It's not, oh, it's escape motivated behavior or sensory seeking. It's making a team-based, including parents, best educated guess by closely observing the patterns as to what the child is responding to. Now, we have to start with the premise that the child has neurological differences, okay? So we have to go from there, but it's all about emotional and physiological regulation. What supports can we put into place? And I just mentioned, you know, 1% of 100% of supports I could have spoken about. But what could we put in place? And in some cases, they might have to be dietary, nutritional, biomedical if a child has food allergies or food sensitivities where the GI issues really are impacting the child. And that's why he's slamming his stomach against the table, or that's why he's rolling on the floor, okay? But we need to really try to put those pieces together and address the underlying factors. That's what's most important. Of course, so much easier said than done. But over time, we really get to know that child, and we have to include parents in that very sensitive process.
So we are running out of time, but I will just say this was amazing. I think that the messages that I get from you speaking is, one, we need to think neurodiversity and think of that as the new normal. And second, that we need to change the environment first before we try to do anything towards the individual student. And I think that those are really important messages. I think that now we need to thank you, and Jennie Grammer is going to come on and give a little update on this collaborative that brought you here.
And let me also just say, Connie, thank you for the wonderful moderation. Thank you for your wonderful work.
Yeah, it was great to see you. Okay, bye.
Great. Thank you both, Barry and Connie, for your talk, and for Connie, your Q&A that you led so nicely for us. I know we had a lot of questions that went unanswered because we had so much interest in this topic. And so we really appreciate everybody's engagement and their enthusiasm around this area of work, so central to our work for the UC-CSU Collaborative for Neuroscience, Diversity, and Learning. So I'm Jennie Grammer, and I'm the faculty director of the UCLA side of the collaborative. And we just wanted to end with a quick note to let you all know that we're continuing to build and grow our efforts. As Alison described at the beginning, adults really do have the power to transform experiences for kids. I think that theme came through in the talk that we heard today and the comments afterwards. So we want your support. We'd love to have your support as we continue to build this work. You can follow along with us as we continue to build. And we're excited to have you all engaged as we move forward. So thank you again for joining us today. And we're going to close out the session. You're going to see a request for some feedback because we're really interested in learning what folks are interested in hearing from us about in the future. And so please, if you have a moment, respond to that. We would be really appreciative. And thank you so much.